Good afternoon, Sergio. Thank you for being us today. We have a couple questions for you from our members. So the first question is, since the invasion started, numerous multinational companies have chosen to pause or cease their operations in Russia, which created a severe impact to the Russian workforces, compounded by increasing stringent sanctions and Russia's anti-sanction measures. For those companies who chose to cease operations, divest and dissolve Russian legal entities, what challenges, in your view, they are facing in Russia?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for the question. There is a lot of confusion at the moment, also in Russia, about a lot of these questions. So I have tried to collect as many information as I could from the companies that are cutting these ties. And by the way, between those that have announced suspension of operation and those that have already announced that they're pulling for Russia, from my accounts, there are more than 280,000 employees impacted in the country. So it's not a small number. At the moment, the Russian government has has announced several different type of reaction against these sanctions. If we focus on the HR side, which I guess it's probably the most important one, we need to consider the fact that many companies have announced that they will simply continue paying employees and they are suspending operation, which is probably the safest measure at this stage, also because you need to consider that in Russia there is a process which standard would require to announce a mass layoff at least 3 months in advance. Then, depending on for example, unionization within the company, depending on the sector, this can vary. There would be negotiation also about severance pay and defining other elements around that. But it is especially the strict process. And from the information that I got up until yesterday, only very few companies, really a couple of companies, have started this process in Moscow, okay? Most of the other companies have not, and they're probably looking into this. In parallel, there is a second complexity. A lot of professional firms are also pulling out of Russia, as you probably noticed, also many law firms. And one of the problems that I found out speaking with some HR people in Russia is that at the moment they have problem also getting professional support exactly on dealing with this matter, because they're delicate from this point of view, okay? Because it's about the employees. We need to think about employees. We have foreign employees that are working in these companies, so we need to assess their status. From the information that I got, a lot of companies have started pulling their employees abroad, but because of airline sanctions, etc., there are not many routes out of Russia. So this is also an element that we need to consider. And the other element is also about the entire payments, because also people cannot access all of their funds at the moment. And transferring funds to the Russian entities is becoming complicated because also there of the sanctions that are in place at the moment. So it is all a highly volatile moment. Also considering that several companies have been receiving inspections, okay, by the Russian authorities. Depending on the cities, this is varying. Also, their reports, to a certain extent, there were companies that were afraid of getting more hit by the authorities there, whereas this is probably not happening in the numbers that were expected, at least so far.
What kind of inspections they're receiving? Labor inspections or finance? What exactly are those?
It's more around finance, and apparently the point is this: they are all looking. So the Russian authorities are all scrutinizing the actions that are done in Russia. Because one thing is the announcement that is done here on the Western media about, of course, company leaving or pausing operation, etc. The other element is exactly looking into what is happening in Russia. One point that I have, I cannot talk about the brand, but it is around a brand that has announced that they're stopping their operation in Russia, but they do not operate directly. They operate to a franchisee partner, and this franchisee partner is bringing this company already to court. And this is another element that we have. Many companies have not been operating directly in the country, but they have different type of agreements in the countries. And this is also proving to be a complicated element at this moment in terms of, for example, taking decision of severing ties and pausing operations there.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Sergio. I have a follow-up question about employee relations. So in Russia, if employees are being laid off, who would be the person or the unit to negotiate or talk to employer? Do they have a strong union presence or not really?
It varies by sector, of course. Let's say that unions, of course, back in the communist era had a very strong presence, and after that they kind of got weaker, but in certain areas they're still strong. If we think, for example, automotive sector, they are still strong. But that is also why, for example, in the automotive sector, what we know is that most companies have announced only a partial halt to the current to the current operation, which, by the way, still needs to be negotiated with the local unions, because, of course, this also creates needs to be announced and informed. So the procedure depends also from the type of representatives you might have. At the moment, the companies that have already started that are more advanced on some procedure are a smaller company, which are highly professionalized, I would say, for example, some legal firms, because they're pursuing individual settlements agreement or the way to actually get into a different type. But in where there are larger numbers, where unions probably in place, the process is not always completely clear. Also because the local labor administration of the Russian government needs to be involved also in the process and needs to be notified of the entire process.
Wow. Okay. It sounds very complicated. Any reactions from those employees potentially being impacted? I know they might not have been laid off yet, but like, are they scared? I mean, of course they are, but what the sentiment you got from the ground?
Well, I think that the sentiment varies. I've been speaking with a couple of HR people in the country, and of course, most of the people have been understanding of the situation, take into consideration that, of course, the type of communication that I've had, especially if it was email, was, how can I say, careful in what they were saying, and I completely understand it at this stage. But so in a lot of cases, they were understanding. And there have been also a few cases, also public on LinkedIn, where actual employees of Western companies in Russia have been asking for closure because they understand what is happening. In general, what I think is that employees of Western companies or foreign companies are more open and more keen to also get type of news. One of the particular element and one of the particular complexities how Western companies are announcing this to the employees, because they cannot refer. They have limited power to actually refer to a certain amount of certain information. They cannot refer, for example, to the fact that there is a war in Ukraine, because this could actually pose as a threat to the employees themselves there. Right. This is where it is very complicated, even the communication itself. At the moment, from what I feel, but it is really it is really a handful of companies that I've been able to talk to, because at the moment it's also difficult to get in touch with. The sentiment is that they are appreciating also the fact that companies, for example, are still continuing to pay salary. They are not making too drastic changes. Also because consider, I spoke with one of the company which is directly hit by sanctions, so they would not be able to operate anymore, but still they have decided to guarantee 4 months of pay minimum to their employees in the country still. So wow. There is also, from this point of view, an element of protection that some countries are still giving to their employees, and this is an important aspect.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I've seen some news about companies ask their employees to not talk anything on social media. So it's self-protection. I appreciate that insight for sure. So we'll go to our second question. And you mentioned some of our member companies have told us the ability to pay workers in Russia is increasingly limited.
Yes.
The restrictions on international financial transactions will pose a barrier to employers outside Russia paying their workforces in Russia, even they have to keep paying. So what your advice on companies are doing this, and now how does it look like in the future? Like, does it going to just completely cease at some point?
So in theory, so I've been investigating this a little bit more. So in theory, funds transfer from the West to actually pay employee are not prohibited. The problem is that they're made very difficult, especially by the fact that some banks have been unplugged from the SWIFT payment system. I think I know that a few banks that still have a few Western banks that still have a direct presence in Russia are trying to look at processes that make this very transparent, because one of the points is when there are sanctions is that you need to make very transparent what the money that you're sending for it is used for. At the moment, I think that companies are trying to use any reserve that they have in the country or through partnership that they have in the countries. And they're actually also trying to ask for support to local financial institutions. The big problem here is going to be really, at the moment, I think, from what I understood, at the moment, there is not really huge issues in paying the standard salaries. The problem is if we need to start paying severance packages with the risk that Russian authorities are going to seize some part of the funding or some part of the assets that companies have in Russia. That's where many criticalities are there today. Then, of course, it depends a lot from the type of operation. On the other side, I spoke with a few professional firms that provide service, for example, in terms of employee services in Russia. And even if they had a pressure about, for example, leaving Russia themselves, they decided to stick at the moment exactly because they need to support companies and employees in the countries, and they will need to continue providing this. So employee of record services and companies like this, because this is actually needed. And they're also, so the other element is, I've read online a few articles about, for example, trying to move money via China or via company, but this is even more dangerous. If money transfers needed, it's important that they're actually flowing through the channels that are allowed. Let's remember that two large Russian banks are still connected to SWIFT, so it is possible to route money through those. But we need to see it is important not to make, let's say, gray solutions into this problem.
Sorry, I have seen that too. I just want to mention that. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, the other complexity, and probably is one of the elements that most, is a lot of foreign companies were paying employees in dollars in Russia, especially certain type of employees, and this is not possible anymore, or at least they cannot withdraw the money in foreign currencies, or they are forced to a certain way also to exchange a certain number of money into rubles. So this is where also companies are trying to be creative and how to at least try to maintain the buying power of their employees in the country.
Yeah, I've seen an article encourage employers who located outside Russia to, if you have equities or bonds or bonuses, just hold it for now and just see how it goes. Right.
For example.
I also have a question about like rubies, right? Which have hyperinflation in Russia, and that's a concern for employers. Yes. Pay them as well. Yes. Okay, thank you very much for your time today, Sergio.
Thank you.
I want to know what you need from us, from our members, and how we can help.
Well, continue. As I mentioned, I've tried to create this HR for Ukraine resource online, which you can access and support with further resources. Also, individual initiative from certain companies sometimes can be very good in continuing this dialogue. What is important is, of course, we started focusing on Ukraine. At the moment, there are a lot of HR issues also for the people in Russia, for the employees that are losing their job there, and the companies that are settling their affairs there. So any information and how much we can diffuse, it's important. The HR community is reacting very positively on this, and this is just kind of a box where all of this information can be pulled together.
Thanks, Sergio. Your work has been very inspiring, and we'll continue to work with you on different issues. I see this going to be continued to other neighboring countries, not only just in Russia, Ukraine. So we'll continue to work with you, and thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you very much.